Well, how's it going, Dr. Pate?
Hello,
Pastor
Dr.
Pat?
Marquez. It's another beautiful day for an OTXNT. It's been months, I think, since we've done this. So excited to be back in the chair.
It's good. I know people can hardly survive without our blessing to them in our
It's
our
true.
lovely talks.
Everybody
Uh,
every day is just wondering, where have we gone? Why are we not back on?
it's all the rumor mill on Twitter that there was a falling out,
That's
and
right.
Ben and Andrew aren't speaking to each other
Uh,
anymore.
that'd be funny. That'd be funny. Well, hey, yeah, I'll tell you, this is one I'm excited for you to help me with. Question about tithing. And I've just preached through some giving. We're in the text. I'm going through the Gospel of Matthew, and the first four verses deal with giving. And so I started talking about some of that. So I have some thoughts, but I'd love to get a New Testament perspective on giving. I mean, questions, if you're interested as you're watching this video, is tithing still relevant? Where does the tithe go? All of that kind of stuff, I think, is one that you're going to want to listen to. I think it's important for us to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and of course the people of God have supported the ministry of God throughout history. And so we've got to have giving as part of our disciplined following of Christ. And so that's significant. You know, what degree should the Old Testament be our model guide? I think it's a really interesting question that a lot of people don't think a lot about, unless you're looking sometimes. I think people sometimes like to look for excuses to maybe not give, but that shouldn't be the Christian's heart. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive into this
Let's do it.
because it's fun. Well, you want to pray?
Let's do it, man.
All right. Join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
All
So
right.
let me kind of set the scene for you. So I just got done teaching about 2 weeks ago on giving, and Jesus in Matthew 6 verses 1 through 4 is going to be start. He's setting up the first verse. He's talking about just doing what the hypocrites do. Don't be like them. So he gives the scenario that these people are like trumpeting all their giving. So he says this beginning in verse 2 of chapter 6. When you give to the poor, don't sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be applauded by people. Truly, I tell you, they have their reward. But when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So, look, that passage about alms giving, it's the idea that as they're giving, there's no reason to be trumpeting, but all of this. But when I was teaching on this, I told my people that I think that there's good reason to see that a big principle to pull from this is that Christians are just going to be givers, that we should be givers, right? Because he makes a big case that as you give, your Father will also reward you. He's going to take care of you if you're willing to step out and give. And so I just kind of use that as a launching piece to just say, generosity is something that he would like for it to be built into his people. And then I just started kind of looking at just different ways in which, God expected his people to give throughout the scriptures. And so that's kind of where I took it as is like, this is a key principle. Generosity is a key principle. And then there are different ways that God expected his people to give. And you see that in the Torah. You see that in kind of, the idea of offerings. You see that in sacrifices. Like these are all things that the people were expected to bring as part of their worship. You see that as the tithe, of course, that was given. And remember, that's a 10% of whatever it was that you did, right? So if you're a farmer, it's 10%. You give the 10% of the crops, you 10% of your shepherding, all of that kind of stuff that you would give. So my thought is that this is a great passage, even though Jesus is talking about the giving of alms, that it does relate to our giving in general, that we should recognize that my giving is a secret thing between me and God. But that being said, I think we should all consider do I give and how do I give? And I direct my people to say, like, I do believe that tithing is still relevant. That's a not it's not the only thing, but it is. So let me ask you this. Oftentimes, and I know you've heard this, I've heard this, people will say, listen, tithing was expected for the Old Testament. But in the New Testament, that's not for us anymore. It's an old covenant thing. It was all connected to this temple and the sacrifice and the worship. And so yeah, we're new people now. We don't need to tithe. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think the problem there kind of is it's kind of a usual problem that we see with how people treat the Old Testament as anything that's there that I don't like or that I don't want to do is dismissed because hey, I'm in the new covenant, and it's kind of lazy. And of course, as we try to work through these conversations, we're trying to direct people to understanding that there is a appropriate way to interpret the Old Testament, and what is brought over as law in the New Testament or as required in the New Testament. You know, how do we do that? How do we work through those issues? And then those things that aren't explicitly brought over, what do we see there? And there ought to be some sort of implicit principle if it's not an explicit something that's carrying on. Like the Ten Commandments are carried on. You know, we see that in the New Testament. Almost every single one of the Ten Commandments is repeated. The summary of the Ten Commandments is given by Christ. And so the commandments of God are not some sort of fuzzy thing that we don't know what they are. I think a lot of people look at the law of Christ and kind of view that as some sort of new spiritual law that is wholly separate from the law of God in the Old Testament, which
Yeah.
I think is a real problem that we have in the evangelical world. But the giving law, yeah, it is tied to the ceremonial, but the principle at work is something that we can easily carry over, and we should. You know, nothing that God gave Israel is completely in isolation from what God desires of His people. It's just it might be applied today in a different way. And so I think that's really important. When it comes to giving, you do see that the purpose of the tithe largely was a requirement of the people to support the temple or the tabernacle and the Levitical priesthood. So what has changed in the New Testament era, the New Covenant era, is well, we don't have a temple anymore. The temple now resides in the hearts of you and I, where the Holy Spirit resides. But that temple is now manifested. The gathering of the people, the stones, the holy temple that God is building, comes together in the assembly, the ecclesia, the church. And so, is there a carrying over the principle supporting that work of the local gathering where we gather, perhaps in a facility, or if we have to lease space or rent space, you know, where's that money supposed to come from? And then the personnel, the Levitical priesthood was supported, and there was a priest in every tribe, and they didn't have an allotment of land. They were supported by the giving. And so, who is that local representative of Christ today? Where does he do his ministry? And so, you know, that in my mind carries on to the local pastor. And so, just as we have a local representation of God's living temple, and we have a local representation of the Levitical priest, the elder, the pastor, the way that they were supported in the Old Testament should be a similar means of how they're supported in the New. And so, does that mean a tithe of 10%? Well, if the Old Testament viewed that figure as an appropriate figure for the ongoing maintenance of the ministry, then I think it's probably an appropriate figure for today. And so, are we legally bound to that figure? I don't think so because we're not a theocracy. Things aren't exactly aligned in the same way. But it's one of those things that I think we're under grace. We're no longer under law in the fact that we're not going to secure salvation by how much we give or how much we do. But the grace often leads us to perform greater deeds than those that were obliged to do it under the law. And so I would hope that Christians are looking at the tithe, as a kind of good baseline expectation of how I might manage my finances and give back to the Lord. And then also take advantage of the other great principles that we see of offerings, free will offerings, giving above and beyond, sacrificial giving, and all of those things. And so that's kind of where I land on it. If somebody was under hard times, I'm not going to ask them to go put a tithe on their credit card and go into debt. I think there are certain things that we have some room here. I even think the Old Testament teaches on this to some degree. But the reality is, giving a tenth is a way of saying, I want to support what God's doing. It's the kind of percentage that God gave in the Old Testament, and I think that holds today. If you have roughly 10 families in your church, those 10 families would be able to support a pastor's family with a decent wage. And so, it just goes to all of these things that I think are a good reason to try to see the tithe as a target. The other side note to this, and I'll let you kind of respond, is that it also teaches us to manage the money that God has entrusted us to. So if you're on hard times and you can't give because of debt or because of just the fact that you lost your job or something along those lines, uh, you know, the Lord is good and gracious, and He's not, checking boxes to see if you're, getting in or out of heaven. At the same time, a lot of people, the reason they aren't giving is because they're not managing their resources well. And in their failure to manage their resources, they don't know what's coming in. They don't know what's going out. All they know is at the end of the month, they don't have much left. And so they assume, oh, I couldn't give to the Lord. Well, when
Yeah.
you commit that first fruit to the Lord, and then you work with what's left, it's amazing. At the end of the month, you'll probably be in about the same place. But we have the kind of tendency to spend whatever we have. And so that's another way of first fruit giving is to give out of that excess. Determine what you're going to give. I would say a tenth is a really good target, and then manage your resources from there. So
Yeah.
that's kind of, I have some verses and all that we can go to, but yeah, are you agreeing with that? You think
No,
that
I
I'm
would agree with that. I think the best way to start in my mind on is this required, is this not, is once again, I think you're right to say that this is an issue of how do we read the Bible. So like I think about oftentimes what people say is, oh, that's Old Testament. We don't need it anymore. It's not for us. But we forget, how does the New Testament teach us how to read the Old Testament? So mine always goes to, like, Paul gives us a great way to kind of think through it, as like, so in First Timothy 5, as he's
yes,
talking about paying the pastors, right? The good leaders be considered double worthy. Elders who are good leaders to be considered worthy of a double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. Then he quotes this passage, right? Do not muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. And then Jesus, the worker, is worthy of his wages. So he says the reason why you should do it is because that Old Testament principle of that ox that's working, let him participate in the eating. Paul actually will use that same thing, that same reference, right? He'll use that in First Corinthians, and he'll say, and I love that he says this of in First Corinthians, he'll actually quote that passage and say, do you think God is actually concerned about oxen? Didn't he write this for our benefit, right? So he says at First Corinthians 9, after he quotes that, is God really concerned about oxen? He's really saying it for our sake. Yes, it's written for our sake, because he who plows ought to plow in hope, and he who threshes should thresh in hope of sharing the crop. So he gives a giving principle in there. But what does he do is he takes something as what we would say, oh, that's stupid. There's a rule about an ox. That's not for me. And he uses the principle that comes from that. And so I think that it would do us well as readers of the Bible to look at things like the tithe and say, well, what's the principle behind that? And a principle behind that is God expected his people to be givers, and he expected to give 10%. One thing I was reading on an article on, and we'll get to this one. I think it needs to be asked about gross income versus net income. But one of the things he points out is, like, the tithe is not just mosaic, and it's not just a mosaic thing. If you remember, what is it in Genesis 10 with Melchizedek? What does
yeah,
Abraham do? He comes and gives a tithe. So that principle of a tithe is already there. It's already part of this. Prior to the giving of the law. So that should give us pause again to say, maybe this is a baseline of just something that God wants from his people. So that's the first thing is I think reading the Old Testament to understand the way the New Testament looks at it is we should not just start by saying, well, we don't need that because it's old. But like the principles are already there of we should do this. And so I do think this is important. I think we are growing. We've got a new generation that has been told that this is irrelevant or never even thought about it. And I do think it's something that all of our people should say is you should, I think, baseline give a tithe of your income. Um, we should ask gross versus net in just a second. But one of the things I think you do that for is that is not, people will say, well, you guys are a bunch of people who just want money. You're both pastors. That's what you want. You just want people to support your budgets better. No, at the end of the day, this is between you and the Lord, right? If we're going to take what
Yeah.
Jesus says in Matthew 6 seriously, is there needs to be some trust in here, right? That if God asks me to give, I'm going to trust him. That's the whole point of the Malachi passage, too, that's quoted, right? Like,
Yeah.
I have stopped blessing you, but if you do this, I'll bless you. Jesus says it here, too, that your giving's in secret and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. I think he's implying kind of the same thing. If you're willing to be generous with what God has given you, and give it back. Trust him with it. There's a faith piece. When I pull
Yeah.
my wallet out and I'm trusting that God is going to take care of me. And so there's a spiritual piece to this. It's not for the church's sake. It's really more for you and him. And God uses that providentially to do his to do the work, even though God's completely capable. If God wanted to today, he could take every church and just magically make all their bank accounts happen. That's not how he chooses to do it, though.
Right.
He would have you could have gold bars fall on everybody's doorstep and just say it's all done. But that's not how he does it. He does it through his people. Same thing in the Old Testament as they're building the tabernacles. It's the people who will bring it and he will use it to build it, not just it's all here magically for you. So all that to say is I think that there's a faith piece to say, okay, I'm willing to step out in faith and say, okay, I'll trust you with what you've asked me to do. And so that's where I think is read the Old Testament that way and realize that this is a spiritual thing. It's a faith thing. It's a trust thing that I'm willing to actually say, whatever I make, I'm going to give 10%. I'm going to make sure that comes off first to God. It's a no,
Yeah.
it's a non-negotiable. And I don't think that's legalistic at all. I think that's just saying I want to honor and step out in faith and I want to live that way for him. I want to trust him with what he's asked me to do. I don't know. There you go. So that's the
Yeah.
first piece. Yeah. Anything else you'd add to that?
Well, I'm just right with you. I think that that's again that's the model. I have worked with some young people who have dug a bit of a hole, and they're really struggling, and they're trying to figure out. I don't even know how I'm going to pay my rent, and I think there's a certain degree of a disservice that we've done in our society for those that are coming up. And so, how do you handle it when you're dealing with debt and all of that? I think the way that I would respond is, let's really take a look and let's see if you can't give God 10%. And if you can't right now, then how are we going to get there as quickly as possible? Because that's what he's desiring of us, and some of us have sold ourselves into slavery due to debt. And as a result, we don't have much in the way of resources. Well, we need to work really hard to get out from under this debt, but as soon as possible and right away, give what you can give, and then let's work that up
Yeah.
because I think that is it's where your heart's at. And so I don't want someone who's like, well, I literally can't do it.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people can do a lot more than they think they can because they haven't really looked. But then also it's a hard issue. Are you committed to the Lord and then trusting Him and then working your way there? But I think that is the target. That's what we should strive for. And the reason that I want people to do this, again, my church is doing well financially. I don't shy away from teaching on this, but I'm not trying to hit everybody up for big money. In fact, I think a lot of times the tithe isn't how churches get big money, by the way, that they usually are taking advantage of people that are just will give everything that they have. And of course, that in my mind is a reprobate church that is going to do that to you. But if people gave what the Old Testament modeled for us, then that modeling of the blessing of Malachi is also something that would be expected. And of course, so you mentioned that you've robbed me, says the Lord. In what way have we robbed you? They ask. And he says, in your tithes and your offerings. Test me in this and see if I won't open up the floodgates of heaven. And so God asks us to test him in our faithfulness if he'll not respond with blessing. And then of course we can go to the storehouse question there as well. But that is an incredible passage. The reason that we want people to give and give faithfully, and utilizing the model that we see in the tithe, kind of is just where do you want to start? I mean, why not use the Old Testament as the guide that God gave us? But the reason that we want this for our people is because we want God to bless them.
Yeah.
And if you'll be faithful in this, God promised he'll be faithful. And so we want you to be successful. And God promises that, barring exceptional circumstances like Job, if you'll do it his way, you're going to receive the Deuteronomic blessings on you and your household. And so this is not something that we should be robbing our people of by being afraid to talk about it.
Yeah, I
And
don't think there's
so, yeah,
anything, by the way, I don't think there's anything like people get a little nervous when you talk like that about like, ooh, God's going to bless you. Like, I don't think that that even means that you're like a prosperity gospel. I don't, you don't,
no,
we get weird, people get weirded out that I just think it means what it says, right? It doesn't tell you how he's going to bless you. Um, but I do think that, that it means what it says. He'll bless you. So that could be that financially you're going to be blessed. It doesn't mean that that you're going to have this that all of a sudden if you give 10, he's going to give you 100 full back. There's no promise to that. But it means
no,
that he's got you. He's got you taken care of, and you should trust him with that. It could be, and I've heard it said too, the other side is if you're not willing to give him his 10, people have said he has a way of getting his 10 from you one way or the other. And are you willing to give it up front willingly, or are you going to just kind of bleed that out? But I do think, am I willing to just trust him
yeah.
and say, okay, he's got it, and I'm trusting to see that, yeah, where's this blessing that he's said he's going to do? I think a lot of people lack the blessing of God and the hand of God on them because they say, "Oh, I trust you and I'm willing to follow you," but they're not willing to do this. Like there's like I'm full of faith. Yes, he's my. But when it comes to this, and this is an issue of priorities too. When sometimes we say there's no margin, you look and say, well, what are you spending? Right. And oftentimes I'm willing to give, make sure I can give to every subscription service that there is. I'll eat out every single meal. And then say, well, I've got nothing left, or I'll go buy concert tickets, all that. And you're saying, I have nothing. And you're like, okay, well, your priorities then have shown ease. Your priorities have shown entertainment over ever giving God anything. That's not to say you can't do those things. Those are all fun things to do. But like you show your priorities with what you give towards. And there's too many guys. This is a whole nother thing. That's why I'm a fan of the Dave Ramsey financial peace stuff. Um,
Yeah.
because it does help you to really gain, like if you look at the debt stuff and you look at your own life and you're giving, like he does help you look and say, like, what do I spend my money on? And oftentimes we just don't look. Oftentimes we don't care or think about it. So I think it's worth looking at and just saying, does my budget reflect one that I trust God, or does my budget reflect that you know, myself, my priorities of myself for sure.
And that's the old saying, if you want to see someone's discipleship, take a look at their calendar and their budget, their
Yeah.
bank account. If you've truly given your life to Christ, then we should see Christ, his work, his service in your time and in your bank account. That's what we care about. That's what reflects it. And so if becoming a Christian does not impact my commitments of time and resources, then did I really give him my life, or did I just kind of have an emotional high for a day?
Yeah.
And so, we want God to bless our people. The other thing, so I'd like to talk about the storehouse question, but also you were going to talk about net or gross. Where you
Yeah, I
want to
had
go
a
next?
question on that. So, okay, like the idea of should I give before tax or after, right? That's the big question. So, this was an interesting one because I know people ask that, like, what do I do? Do I wait before Uncle Sam takes it out, or do I look and see like potentially what I'm supposed to be pulling in? And I do think that's an interesting question. Like, there's no specifics, right, about how to do this. I was just listening to, reading an article on this, of just the idea that, of how we should do it. And this one, it comes down on like we should be gross givers. And I do think that there is something to it, all right, of we're letting the government get the first fruits, right? And then we give God less, right? Should we
Yeah.
trust God with the first, regardless of what the government is? And I do think, once again, that comes back to a trust piece, right? Am I willing to just say, I'm going to do this? I know people are going to debate. This is one of those, it's not a black and white thing. It's just one that I think is preferential. But I do think, what does it say? So I would land on do it prior to, do it prior to tithe prior to what you're going to have taxes taken out. Sometimes you say, I don't even know what they're taking out. I don't even know what a real check could make. And you just got to figure that out with between you and the Lord. But I think it's worth saying, does God truly get, am I truly going to give God from the top, or do I wait and give him what's left over? So I would lean towards, pre-tax, do that. Uh, Salary sometimes easier to figure
Yeah.
that out versus hourly kind of stuff. But that's between you and God how you do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just would go to Cain and Abel. They both gave. Why does Abel get such a hard time? They both gave. Well, it's he's not giving his best. And so, why should I let Uncle Sam determine what I'm giving to the Lord? I should give to the
Yeah.
Lord out of the first fruit. I know people that will give out of the net and then they'll give on their tax return if they have one. But you're just basically saying, well, Uncle Sam, because he's got the confiscatory power, gets to be my first vendor, and then God gets to be my second.
Yeah.
I just don't like that. And at the end of the day, is it really all that much more money? It probably is a little bit. That's otherwise people would just give on the gross. In my mind, it's not really that tricky. Now, you can always look at your W-2 at the end of the year and see, I committed X amount per month, so I could budget on that. And then, hey, I had a better year, so I'll go, uh, you know, have a one-time payment in January and make it even. This stuff's not that complicated because it says gross on that
Yeah.
W-2, so anyway, that's where I'm at. The truth is so few people give above like 2 to 3%. I think that's the
That's the
average
stats. It's
evangelical.
like
Yeah.
2.5% is what it is,
So yeah, if someone's tithing 10% on the net, they're ahead of the game. But if you're willing to go that way, why not go all the way and say, God, you have it, you have my heart, you have the first deal.
So
So yeah.
let me connect it to this, right? Um, do you think there's something about when you give? Like, do you need to be, does it matter if you're like first of the month versus, like I know some people are very dogmatic, like, okay, if it's first fruits, it's got to be the first check and you need to do it, or it should be weekly that you're giving. Like, what do you think about some of that?
So I would say that that's getting to a legalistic level that's not necessarily helpful. I think if you're tempted to blow the money before, then yeah, you get rid of it, get it off your hands. I think in today's world you can kind of just determine, hey, I'm supposed to make X amount of money this year, and so it's just in my mind, that I just want to make it easy as possible so that I don't forget because things get busy. So I would look at, okay, I'm making gross this amount in the month. I'm going to take 10% and I'm just going to have that on a twice a month. I'm going to have it twice a month. I'm going to have it go out on this date. And I've accounted for it. So that's going to be just fine. And then, yeah, there's the odd money that comes in throughout the year. I had an extra teaching contract. I had something like that. And so I think it's helpful at the end of the year to say, okay, I want to honor this. And of course, to be honest, I haven't always looked. I just assume that I'm in the ballpark and I don't worry. And then, there's other free will offering that I kind of give throughout the year. Or if we're doing Annie Armstrong or
Yeah,
Lottie
above and
Moon,
beyond. And
you
you
know,
see that in the
yeah,
scriptures. It's like, that's the thing, is like there was a baseline, and then there
yeah,
was the offerings, there was the fellowship offerings, there's all the other stuff. It's just like out of a gratitude of what God has done, I want to give, beyond that, So
yeah.
those were not there, even within that Old Testament standard, there was an expectation. These were demanded, these were expected, and then there was the others that weren't, and yet people did it because they wanted to do it in gratitude or as a sign of worship, to say thank you.
So I guess New Testament on that question, we've got the Second Corinthians passage or sorry, the First Corinthians passage. On the first day of the week, let each of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. So Paul did say in handling things. Now this is kind of pre-banking. You know, pretty much don't try to go find it when I show up because he was
Yeah.
raising money for those needing help in Judea Christians. And so he was saying, hey, when you gather weekly on the first day, so it is part of. It seems like to be part of worship. Bring a little bit so that you don't put yourself in a hole and have to go collect it. So I think that's a helpful deal. And if you're in a maybe you're a heavy tip based revenue and it's really unpredictable, you may need to do it a little bit more frequently so that you don't you put yourself so far behind that you can't make it up.
Yeah.
So, there might be a case where I think it's helpful. So I would say what was suggested. Make sure it's that very first check. If that's helpful in your field, so make sure that you honor the commitment you make to the Lord. Then do it that way. But at the end of the day, if you're giving and you're successfully giving what you've committed to the Lord, maybe 10%, maybe 11, maybe 12, maybe you're working your way up, but you're intentionally trying to get there. Then do that. And then my view is if I was ever short somewhere, because of the other offerings that are given, the Lord knows my heart. But I also don't want to just kind of let myself off the hook if I'm not managing my resources there.
Yeah.
I don't want to rob God. And I believe I would be robbing God, not because of the Old Testament, because I have a conviction in the New that this is what He would like me to do. And so, that to him who knows what is right and does not do it, to him it is sin. So it's a personal conscience issue now that if I don't honor God in this way, then I'm sinning, and so I don't want to do that. So yeah, that's my view there. I think gross giving is where I would be at. I think it's the easiest way just to make sure that you're committed and that Uncle Sam doesn't get to take your spot. And then, of course, what are you doing with FICA? What are you doing with all that other kind of stuff? That's supposed to be coming back to you in the way of Social Security at the worst possible investment ever. But, I don't want to cloud my giving with all of that stuff. So I'd rather
Yeah.
give gross
Yeah.
and then just commit. Yeah. So, um,
I agree, man. Well, okay. So next question that I think comes up that's all connected to this is where does my tithe go, right? So in the Old Testament, where are tithes and offerings going? So they're going to the temple, they're going to your local like Levitical guys that are there who are in your town. Um, primarily though the storehouse of the temple, right? That you're going to bring all your goods there. But so people have asked, I've had one person ask me, okay, so he says bring it to the storehouse. Does that translate directly over to just mean your tithe should go to the church? Or can I spread my tithe out and be like, well, I want to give 10%, I want to give, 5% here, and I like what's going on with this ministry at a different place. I want to give 5% there. So does the storehouse necessitate that it all come to the same storehouse? Like I said, in Malachi, it seems to be bring it all to the temple. But here the question is for the church today, if what's the correlation? What should it look like?
yeah.
So I want your thoughts as a New Testament guy. What do you think?
So the way I would look at this is the storehouse likely is a temple reference or a storehouse that was going to end up going to the temple. So my thought would be that in the New Testament we don't have a high priest other than Christ, but we have his representative in our local church. And I think this goes to the accountability issue. Who are you accountable to as your spiritual leader? Who would have been your Levite? And so I think that's your local pastor. Hebrews 13:17, have confidence in your leaders and submit to their authority because they keep watch over you as those who must give an account. So your pastor has to account to God how they minister to your soul. That is different than a podcast, Christian podcast that I really like, or a focus on the family kind of ministry. Those are wonderful things, and I think Christians need to support those. They wouldn't exist if we don't. You love Christian radio, you might need to support your local Christian radio provider. Those are additional things. I think that's something that we should not confuse. Because I think that we can be blessed by a society that's filled with a lot of Christian influences and industries. And we ought to support those if we receive a benefit from them. But I think that the storehouse feature is probably the best place to go. That I should have a local church. I should have a local place that should function as my local storehouse for the tithe piece. And then I am free to do whatever I want with the other 90%. And so if I want to give to any number of ministries as just a way of saying I've been blessed by your ministry or I support your values, then I think you're totally able to do that. And I kind of see this as within the Southern Baptist world. IMB has the Christmas offering, right? Well, if you give to your local church and you give regularly, you're supporting the International Mission Board and a Southern Baptist church just by your regular giving. We then have an additional giving opportunity that supports that ministry directly. And so, some people, that's what they're going to choose to do. But there's any number of good things that I'm blessed by that I might support here and there. But I do try to be very faithful to my church first, and then the church ministries that my church is behind, maybe second, and then what the Lord leads. I might have a collegiate minister that needs a little support or some kind of ministry. What I hope is that as God blesses His people, that you'll just be happy to give. But we're not necessarily line iteming which percentage is going out to get to my figure. Yeah, I think it complicates the situation,
Yeah.
and it kind of puts you in a disposition of, okay, I hit 10, no more than 10. I don't want to I don't want to give God too much. And that is the problem with having a law mindset versus having a grace mindset of, hey, I'm shooting for 10 and that's my target. And then, but Lord, I wish you would bless me to a point where I could give 90. That would be awesome. And I think He's called some people to that purpose. So I don't know. That's my thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I was just looking up as we're talking about this question about where should the full tithe go? And my inclination is it needs to start with the church, right? It needs to start here. And that needs to be the practice. I think there's a faith piece that comes to that too, of um, just practically speaking, when I give and I tithe to to my church, there's a faith of saying I am not in control of what it's going to do and how I need to trust God with it. I think sometimes people want to tithe, but they want to control where that all should go. And so you see that even with the local church too. And I would just venture to say, I think we should get away from all this designation stuff too, of like, oh, I want to designate it just to this or to that. I think there should be a trust of throw it to the general, let the general fund, and leave it alone and just trust God with it. If you want to give beyond and bless in a certain area, then go for it. Do that. But I think you're right. I think it's a good illustration of like we start with my local congregation. I think you're right. This is who I'm accountable to. This is the idea that we should take seriously what we see in the Bible of taking care of our leaders, taking care of our congregation, meeting the needs that pop up in our congregation first. Um, and then beyond that, then I think you support that. So, look, it's one of those ones that there's no like absolute verses, and I think the context is so different too, between the first century church versus ours today. Like there were no parachurch ministries, there was nothing. It was churches, right? And so there's only one place to give. I think that's what murkies the water a little bit of like, okay, they're doing good work and they're serving in this capacity. I would just want to just make sure the motivation, right? That you need to check your motivation of why I'm going to spread my tithe out, right? Sometimes we want to spread our tithe because I don't want them to have it all. I'm not happy with what they're doing, so I'm going to therefore give to a place that I would rather give. Okay. Then what's the issue with the local church? What's wrong with that? It might be that you have an issue with the church. You need to reconsider about what you're doing there if you don't trust them with that. Sometimes it's just like, no, I really want to be able to give, and I got no more margin, but I want to be able to give. And so I get that, and so figuring out what that looks like and how you can support that. But yeah, I would say my thought is start with a church. And then if God gives you an excess, go above. Have heard in some extreme cases, I've heard this, some extreme cases, there are some churches where people come in and if they are to tithe all of their income, it would be like, it's so insane. It would like really mess the church budget up. And those are, those are not like those are your rarity, right? Like that's like the ones like ain't nobody gonna really, for the most part, say if I were to truly tithe, you guys wouldn't know what to do with all the money, right? And I do understand, like on some of there's a level of income that if you're truly to do that, like it would like maybe your whole tithe would hit the whole budget, right, of the church. It would take in, and then you've got this church with this income that you don't want them to be dependent upon just you feeling, writing the check. That is a rarity. And in that case, I do think there's some good thoughts into what do you do with that? If you've had this great excess and you're part of a local church that you can't be the only engine running it, and people can't just be looking at the rich guy to just fund it all. However, that goes a long way. But anyways, I think that's like your special case. And I do think that comes back down to where we're at, right? There's no hard, fast rules here. There's just principles of how should I do this, and between you and God, right? It's Jesus says, don't let the left hand know what the right hand's doing. And so I think that's, once again, all of this stuff, as we're saying as pastors, people are going to say, oh, there you go. These pastors only care about your money. Like, I don't know what you give. I don't know what any of my congregation gives.
Yeah.
I just know the stats. I know the stats because we have a company that does our giving, that takes care of our giving, and have said, here's what the stats are. And it pretty much matches with what you see in American churches in general, right? And so we're kind of tracking with the way that the church typically goes. So that being said, at the end of the day, on some of that, yeah, you just got to get between you and God. What are my motivations? What am I doing here? If you have one of those extreme cases, I'd say talk to your pastor about it. About what do I need to do? How do I do this? Concerns. One person. I mean, if it truly is an issue like that, I would say talk to somebody. If you feel like you don't want them to look at you differently, talk to somebody who's not looking at that way and just seek counsel. But yeah, I mean, those are some things that I would just say, and I know that those scenarios do exist. I know of churches where I'll say this. This is just a secondary piece where they've had giving projects and the church has said to certain individuals, please do not fund the whole thing. We want the church to rise to this. We don't want them just to continue to look to you to foot the bill because we know that you're capable of doing it. And in the past, the person has written something like that. Truthfully, there are some of those cases in those scenarios of, I always think about with shekels come shackles. That was one pastor friend taught me is when if you for your sake if you're a large giver, right? You have to one day you have to kind of get back to this is once again this is between me and God, and my relationship to the way I give should not be based on do I like what's going on or do I like the people right now or am I upset with what happened? Shouldn't be. It should I trust God and I give to him and just trust that he's going to take care of it. And so you don't want yourself to to give in such a way that eventually you say, well, I'll show them, I'll pull mine out, or I'll show them they better do because don't you know how much I give? Like so, every scenario, whether you're you've got a normal amount or an excess amount, it has to once come back down to what is my disposition before the Lord? How this is between me and God. And I do think that's where that grace part comes in of like I just have to trust him, lay it all before him, and and um and just work between me and God how this is going to play out. But he wants us to be cheerful givers. And I don't think that means just give because you like it. I think he wants his people to be a generous people, a very generous people, and to trust him with the rest. So that's pretty much all I've got. I don't know if you got anything else to add.
Well, yeah, I think, yeah, I've never had the uber rich member problem. So it's kind of fun to think of other churches' problems.
Oh
I'll
man,
take some of
yeah,
your problems. I think
exactly.
one helpful thing about being attached to a denomination is that you could always kind of push it to the denominational level because then you're in like agreement. I think some people are like, well, I'll give it to these other ministries because I don't want to overly saturate my own ministry. And then I'm not sure what they would do with it. Of course, are you really sure what these other ministries are going to do? They just have larger budgets so they
Yeah,
can
yeah,
absorb
yeah.
it. If you trust your leadership, I know that if we received a ginormous gift, we wouldn't run and match that in the next year's budget like we have to spend all of this. But I also kind of have a long view a little bit. That's where we should do a post millennialism thing again. That would be fun about what are we doing long term for the kingdom,
Yeah.
and some of those gifts could help build long-term support for churches. So anyway, that's an interesting take, though. I hadn't thought of that very often because I
Oh
just
man,
haven't,
it's
that's my
it's a real
experience.
thing. It's very
Yeah.
rare do you hear it, but it happens. It does happen.
Yeah. And so yeah, it's great. But yeah, of course, we also know that the IMB years ago had to cut missionaries. And so if you got that kind of money, one of the things I will say, this is what I was thinking about, is a lot of times people will default the giving to the person who asked. And so you give to your radio station because it was that time of year and they saturated everything with it's the giving thing, and who will commit to X, Y, or Z. And so our giving a lot of times is not disciplined giving, but it was driven by I know I'm not giving. I might be kind of guilty about not giving, and so asked for it. So God must have been in it. So I'll write the check to this organization. And parachurch organizations are really good at asking. Churches are not always really good at asking because we don't want the people to think that we're obsessed with getting your money. And so I do think a lot of churches sometimes don't receive the support they should receive from their own congregation because the congregation is being asked all the time by all these different groups, and people eventually feel guilty, and then they support whoever asks because they don't want to say no all the time. I don't want to get into the business of just asking all the time, "Hey, support us." That's why it's about being disciplined to say, "Hey, this is what I'm going to give. This is the way I'm going to structure my giving. I'm going to start with my church, and then I'm going to move beyond that." So that you're not necessarily on your heels when somebody comes in and you get a phone call and they say, "Hey, I'm called to this and I need to raise my own support." Uh, well, that call is going to come. If you're an American Christian, you're going to get the call. You're going to get the letter. And one of the things I often get collegiate ministry requests, and usually what I'll say is, "Hey, I support our local Christian Challenge ministry through our denomination," and so I start there, and then if I have excess, I'll pray about it. But I'm happy to put you on my prayer board, and I'll pray for you. And then if the Lord leads, we might be able to subsidize you a little bit, but we'll see. But because I know how I'm giving, I don't feel guilty about saying no. But I had to learn that over time because the requests come and they come often. And so, yeah, that's just kind of one thought I had about that is I don't want to preach on giving every Sunday to compete with the letters my
No.
congregation's receiving in
Yeah.
the mail. So,
No, I think you're right. And I think there is that piece of like how many times you hear people of like this the one like a church member pulled me aside the other day and he said because before he was a Christian, he was an atheist for a long time, yeah, LAPD officer. And he said every time his wife would drag him to church, which was like one day a year, he's like, every single time I'd walk in and the sermon was always about giving. He's like, all these people care about is my money, right? And he has a good laugh about it now. But like, yeah, he just felt like the few times he'd ever come in, it was like, come on, and you don't want that to be the case. And um, but I do think that there's got to be helpful ways to keep your people reminded of like priority. I think Jesus makes it a case of render to Caesar what is Caesar's, render to the Lord what is the Lord's, right? And I do think that there's a place where we should keep in mind: am I giving God what is God's, right? Am I really giving to Him? And am I prioritizing that? And it needs to be on you to do it. And so, yeah, no, I think I appreciate you, man, just kind of talking through some of these things because these are all those things that pop up. It's like I don't have time to talk about all this on a Sunday, and I don't want to have a
yeah.
giving series that's like 8 weeks of each piece. It's like
Because we don't want to talk about money all the time,
exactly,
right? It's really not
exactly,
our heart. Yeah.
exactly, and I do think you think about the passages in Exodus when the people are giving towards the tabernacle. It says each one who's trying to think about it, it talks about that it's the heart of the giver that give. I just want to specifically reference that one really quickly, and then I'll be done. I think it's like let's see, each I don't know. It's like the heart of the giver. Ah, man, I'm butchering it
It's
now.
each
Uh,
each one must give as he's decided in his heart, not
yes,
reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 7.
but you're in Second Corinthians. I'm talking about Exodus. I'm talking about
Oh,
when they're
sorry.
giving to. Here's what it is. It's yes, okay. Everyone whose heart is willing, right? Like that's the idea. Is he calls the people out of whose heart was willing, and then it says in Exodus 35, the Israelite community left Moses present. Everyone whose heart was moved and whose spirit prompted him came back and brought an offering to the Lord for the work of the tent of the meeting, right? And it's just this idea that it's a heart thing. It's got to be between me and God, and it's got to be I should at the end of the day it needs to I should do this because I want to please the Lord and not just this hey give link up the account that kind of a thing, you know. So you see that from the Old Testament, you see it in the New as well. I think that's what that is all about.
Yeah, there's more we could go on, but I think we're running out of time. But
I'm done, man. I've finished. I've tapped out.
I do think during COVID, a lot of people they kind of took giving out of the worship service, and they had like a box in the back.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of churches are still doing that. One of the things, sorry, I don't have to talk about all the time, is I do think giving as part of the worship service is a helpful way of keeping it in front of our people
Yeah.
and not in a crazy sense, but just there is something like, okay, I'm going to set my offering down and make it right with my neighbor, and then present it. It is a worship,
Yeah.
and we're giving back to the God who gave us, and so yeah, I think that's really helpful, and yeah, all right, well,
Should
I
we
got a few other
walk
things, but
down and give? Right. It's the same thing.
yeah.
Should I come down and drop it in the offering box like you see in the New Testament, right? They're watching the little old lady who gives, what she's got, right? Like, where was that? Like, some of those things, I'm like, what were they doing? That'd be an interesting thing, to see. Um, because it was obviously people were putting things in and people were watching them. And so, yeah, I do think there's some aspect of being able to put in. We should talk about sometime. What about the I gave cards that you just drop in, right? Like I gave online cards, those kind of things to make you feel like,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
I so one of the things I do is we collect our visitor cards during offering so that they can drop something in and feel like
Yeah.
I don't have to feel like I got hit up. So maybe they'll fill out the gift the
Yeah. I
visitor
guess
card, which is
I
but then
gave.
we also usually have a QR code on the screen for the online giver. So people
Exactly.
understand people are given different ways.
Yeah.
So it's not as what it used to be.
That's a
All
good
right.
thing. All right.
Well,
Hey,
hey,
man, that's all I
giving
got.
giving leads to blessings, and
It's
you
true.
should maybe pray a blessing over us.
Yeah, if you want this blessing and you don't give to the Lord, you might recognize that maybe there's not because you don't do that. So, anyways, good way to throw that out and close it out, man. All right, let's close out the right way. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. Hey, guys, thanks for listening. Talk to you later.
God bless.